to the Progress City Radio Hour, our town hall. My name is Michael Crawford. With me, as always, Jeff Crawford. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful. It's spring. Spring has sprung here in North Carolina. We live in the woods. It feels very Fantasyland, and we're in week 3 of 4 of Fantasyland. What a treat.
Yes, very much so. Our biggest exploration yet. So it's very exciting. And we're kicking things off with part 1 of what will be a 2-part interview. And this month we are talking, as we have in our other Fantasyland episodes, to Mr. Tom K. Morris, historian, Imagineer, man of many hats. Jeff, this was quite an interview.
Yes, we sat down with Tom 3 different times.
The record.
Yes, it's a record. He kept telling us stories of so many projects he's involved in. And then, on top of that, we wanted to ask him about Fantasyland. You've already heard that. He had a great, just kind of critical eye of Fantasyland. He was there as a fan. And then he is working on learning and publishing, hopefully, WED history. So there's just a ton of stuff that we're interested in that we needed to talk to Tom about.
That's right. He's somebody whose work requires a lot of examination, many decades worth of examination. He started so young and worked on so many projects, as you will hear, that are, keystone projects of the Imagineering playbook, but also his post-Imagineering work as a researcher also deserves close examination. So there is so much to talk about.
That's right. And we didn't even talk to him really about the Sleeping Beauty castle he designed in Disneyland Paris, which was a major part of his body of work. So kudos to him for that. There are other interviews you can listen to there where he talks in detail about that. We kind of felt like that had been talked about a lot, but it's a beautiful castle, Michael.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I have not yet been fortunate enough to visit, but everybody I know who has speaks so highly of it. But as you said, we wanted to try and stay away from things that have been discussed quite a bit on other podcasts and dig into some different things you may not have heard about yet. And so that we did. So without further ado, let's see what Tom Morris has to say. Today, we'd like to welcome Mr. Tom Morris. Tom, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, we're glad to have you. Excited. There's so much to talk about. But I wanted to start out at the beginning for you. Your childhood paper route, which turned out to be a very fruitful one, and that it helped lead to your career at Disney. I just wondered if you would just start off by telling us a little about Jack Sayers, who was a really important person in Disney history that people might not know.
Yeah, he was an important person in Disney history, and he was on my paper route. And I didn't know it. I didn't know who Jack Sayers was. I knew there was a guy named Jack Sayers on my paper route because that's what the form said when I came to collect money every month. But one fortuitous evening when I came by to collect the money, I noticed there was an interesting, unusual new table that he had in his patio. And that table was about a 6-foot diameter white plexiglass clock that said Timex on it with the little Roman numeral indices on it. And I thought, gosh, that sure looks like the one on the clock tower at Disneyland on the train station. And so I asked him, and he said, yeah, good eye, something like that. And he said, I'm the vice president of sales or lessee relations, whatever it was that he told me at the time. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to Disney World in a few weeks or a couple weeks. It wasn't long before I went there. I'm going to Disney World. Do you work there too? He said, well, I sure do. I'm going there too. When are you going? And so I told him, I think he was just shocked like everyone was. And I wasn't sure I was going either, but now that I opened up my mouth, I guess I was. And he said, he would he'd make sure that there'd be someone out there to pick me up and take me there and take me around. So very kindly he did. And he had Jack Lindquist's secretary, whose name was Joanne Modica. Well, first someone picked me up at the airport, if you could call it an airport.
Quonset hut.
Yeah. I don't remember the Quonset hut part of it as much as I remember it was like a stucco. It looked like someone's home almost, it was like, or like a rental car, a second tier rental car agency somewhere, with a few terminals. And, so we land there and someone was there to pick me up. Shockingly, I was scared to death, that I went through with this thing. And what if there's no one there to pick me up? But there was someone there to pick me up, and I wish I knew who that was. It took me in a truck, I believe, or a van. And then I just remember, when are we going to get there? Because it just seemed like, where are we? And I thought that this place was near Orlando. Did we land at the wrong airport? Or is it in Miami or something? It seemed like a 2-hour drive, but I'm sure it wasn't. And I was driven to the Polynesian Hotel, and there I was met by someone. It could have been the VIP hostess, or it could have been one of the PR guys. I remember it as being a guy named Bob Jackson, but it may not have been, because in doing my own research on this, it's like, well, he left just before, but maybe they brought him back for that.
Yeah.
So they took me to this room that was in the Polynesian Hotel lobby, just off the lobby where the shop is on the left, up but closer to the swimming pool. And there were a whole bunch of people in there, and teletype machines, or all these machines, I don't know what they were,
wow.
With a ticker news coming off of it, teletype, I guess. And a few people from some newspapers interviewed me. And I'm like, when are we going to the park? I was telling my story. Eventually, the VIP tour guide came by. I should have done my homework for this. I forgot we were talking about Walt Disney World. Because I did find the name of the VIP hostess who took me on the monorail.
Really?
And over to the Magic Kingdom and into the Magic Kingdom. And I think into City Hall. And now I wonder whether I signed a book or not. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I think I talked maybe to a couple more people or reporters in City Hall. It's funny how I freshly remember certain things, and then other things what happened in this hour between lunch and when I went on the Skyway. So there was still quite a bit of like, I just want to go on the Haunted Mansion.
Right.
And I was handed off to Joanne Modica, and Joanne was a very nice woman, and she was Jack Lindquist's secretary. And so she had the poor duty of taking me around, and we went up Main Street and into Adventureland and onto the Jungle Cruise, I think was the first attraction that we went on. And then the Tiki Room. And I remember being impressed by the huge Tiki Room there and the, what did they call it? The ceremonial house. Mm-hmm. And I seem to recall waterfalls and a big water feature out in front of that may not be there anymore. And I think we went in the tree house, and then we went, I don't know, maybe we went to the Haunted Mansion first. That sounds more likely. And there was nobody, there was hardly anyone there in the park to begin with.
Oh, right.
I look at the photos and it's like a school day for sure. And while the Jungle Cruise had a full boat and the Tiki Room, I think may have been pretty full, we went to the Haunted Mansion and there was no one there. I mean, just literally nobody in the Haunted Mansion. And so I said, will you let me take flash pictures? And they're like, sure. So I only had a certain number of pictures, so I didn't take advantage of that. But I took a picture in the stretching room and I took a picture of the singing bus, I think.
How cool.
And, I got to do that, and Hall of Presidents. And, we looked through the shops in Liberty Square and then went to Fantasyland, had lunch. I had lunch with Joanne Modica, and, people would stop by and I don't know who they were. I'd love to know now who they were.
Right.
Who knows? Roy Disney strolling by.
I had my eye out for Roy Disney because I knew what he looked like, but he was sick.
Oh, yeah.
So he wasn't even there that day. He was at his Bay Hill place, I think. He didn't go out there that day. I remember going on the Skyway. It's a Small World. Peter Pan was not open. 20,000 Leagues was not open. Snow White was awesome. Well, I think went on both sides of Mr. Toad. The Skyway was interesting because it had that bend, that turn in it.
Oh,
and there was nothing in Tomorrowland. Nothing.
Right.
I think the
dead end.
Maybe the Grand Prix was going, I think. But I think the pink and orange fences were up because you could not go into the center of Fantasyland or Tomorrowland. And I took a picture of Tomorrowland from Main Street, and they were still building, it looked like they were still building the back part of the Circle Vision.
Yeah, I think the back part of If You Had Wings was a later edition. Yeah.
But the Moon Ride wasn't ready, and the Circle Vision wasn't ready. Nothing in Tomorrowland, just the Skyway Station was it. And then I remember they kept it was 6:00. The park closed, or maybe it was 5. I don't know what time it closed, but the park stayed open so you could shop. And I remember thinking, well, that's different than Disneyland, but maybe it wasn't. But all the shops were going, and I bought whatever my $5 that I probably had. Stuff that I mostly don't have anymore. And we went back to the Polynesian Hotel, and there was a press conference upstairs in the balcony area where there's now just kind of resting, a lounging area. But they had seats set up, and it was a press conference. And I think it was Card Walker who was doing the talking, but I didn't know who those people were.
Yeah.
But he was talking about the first day, the attendance. We would have liked to have had Roy Disney here, but he's got a terrible cold today, so he's not able to join us. And it was, I think, just some stats, facts and figures about how many people showed up, the first family, their name.
Right.
There's no traffic, the traffic jams. They were probably, shaking in their boots because while they purposely opened on October 1st to avoid crowds, I don't think they were expecting such a non-turnout.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that I've read that they were very worried for several weeks until the Thanksgiving holiday came by. Then the last thing, this is where you all kill me. They said, we know that we have to get you back to the airport because you have to go on because you're going to be met by your aunt and uncle in Atlanta, which was true. And but if you want, you can stay here. We'll give you a room at the Polynesian Hotel. And I showered up there. I do remember, cleaning up and showering at the Poly. And, and I'm like, it was too overwhelming for me. And I didn't have enough chutzpah to say, sure, I'll take that.
It's a big decision
I
at that
didn't
age.
know how to get a hold of my aunt and uncle, in Atlanta. And I don't know if they offered to call them. And I was just like, I didn't want to trouble I didn't want to trouble anybody.
Sure.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. uh, so
Oh, man, that's
I
rough.
declined the offer to stay overnight, but I had dinner at the restaurant that I couldn't pronounce then and probably still can't pronounce to this day, the Papeete Bay or whatever.
The Papiete.
Papeete.
Yeah.
I had dinner there, and I believe I was sitting next to Bob Allen.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And I thought it was, afterwards, I thought it was J.B. Allen.
Mm-hmm.
Then I since found out it couldn't have been J.B. Allen because he was fired for
Yeah. I don't think
this
he would have
happened. And then I was reading, Bob Allen Jr. and I are friends on Facebook, and he was mentioning his growing up in Newport. And this person who was next to me was talking about, oh, you grew up in, we're from Newport too. We lived on the peninsula. We lived on the peninsula too. So there was that discussion that took place. And so for years, I thought it was J.B. Allen, but it turned out to be Robert Allen, Bob Allen. And then I met a slew of people, and I don't know who they all were. There was a long table. There's several long tables in there with a lot of people, and speeches were made, and over my head.
Wow.
Probably jet lagged or overwhelmed or worried about getting to the airport on time. Because it was a night, it was like probably a 9 o'clock or a 10 o'clock flight out.
Man, so you had a real whirlwind tour.
Yeah. So I don't know if I met Marty Sklar or Dick Nunes, or I had long hair, so I don't know if I would have.
Dick Nunes wouldn't talk to you.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who's that hippie kid over there?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't real long, but I mean, it was longish.
Disney long.
Yeah, it was definitely outside the grooming standards. So one day I'd like to find out who was there, because there's got to be there's got to be documents somewhere that say who.
Sure, a guest list or something. That's just wild to think of the amount of people that were probably in that room.
Yeah,
of movers and shakers.
Yeah, it's just. I met Bobbiani. I know I met Bobbiani because he sent me a letter afterwards and sent me a medallion. One of those opening day medallions.
Yeah.
Because he was great friends with another person who was on my paper route. Yeah.
So it turned out to be a very profitable paper.
That's right.
There was also, having nothing to do with the trip to Florida, but Thurl Ravenscroft was on my paper route.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
we love
really?
Thurl. We love Thurl. That's amazing.
And now one of my buddies had a paper route in a different section, and he had Raquel Welch on his paper route. So I'll substitute for you if you need someone to.
Yeah. If you ever need to take a day off.
That never happened. But there were definitely, Holly Holscher was on my paper route too. And she was in charge of the preview center. Sandy Quinn, I think, was Sandy Quinn and Val Watson and Holly Holscher, I believe, were kind of the people, from what I understand, who ran the preview center. And Holly came from Disneyland, and she lived with her folks on my paper route in my neighborhood, the next block over.
So a couple of years later, you get a job at Disneyland, and that leads you to a job at Imagineering as they're ramping up EPCOT. And this is kind of a related question. I mean, EPCOT came to a time where a lot of these first generation Imagineers were taking their last lap. Who were some of the folks that stood out to you when you were just starting, you were a Disney fan, maybe made you pinch yourself to be kind of in cahoots with?
Yeah. I had mixed emotions about starting there while I was still in school, going to Cal State Fullerton, in the process of transferring to either UCLA or USC, and probably UCLA. And I just, I wanted to jump at the chance, and then an adult in my head said, you should really finish school. And I talked with Tony Baxter, and he said, well, the thing is, though, if you finish school, the time you finish school will be 1982, and we'll be laying people off, from all these projects. So that's
right.
Good timing. So if you want to get some work experience, now's the time to do it. So yeah, that makes sense. I'll do this for a year or two.
Huh.
And so when I started, by then I knew who Claude Coates and Mark Davis. I mean, I knew some of those names even back when I was 12 years old. I knew like Ivan Earl, anyone that was in the Art of Animation book, I knew. So right. Claude Coates, Mark Davis, folks like that. But I didn't, know the Imagineers as much. But then through the course of working at Disneyland, I did. And so these were like, rock stars or heroes to me. John Hench, Marty Sklar, who wrote the Disneyland book, which was my, Bible for all things Disneyland. And so it was a little intimidating. And also I very quickly got the sense that being a big fan was not a good idea, not outwardly showing it. I just got the vibe.
Right.
Yeah.
And it may have been that someone, told me that too. It's very likely that someone, said, here, once you're here, you're going to want to just, it's very business-like and blah, 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 blah.
Be cool, man.
Yeah, be cool. So I'm kind of, kicking myself because I was a little too cool maybe. And so I didn't, I did sometimes venture into someone's office and ask them a question. And there were definitely the ones that you could tell were more receptive to it. Mm-hmm. And then others were actually, more aggressive, like would come to your area, like Herb Ryman, would always go around and he kind of trolled you a little bit, which was kind of funny. What's that you're working on there? Are you doing that on purpose? He's just kind of kidding. But so Herb, was always around, and you could always talk to Herb, and he would, just come by and offer his opinion or tell you a story. John Hench did not seem, he was upstairs for one thing. But, I talked to him a few times, and it wasn't very long before my office was very strategically located in the middle of the building on the way from upstairs offices on, it was basically at the crossroads. Anyone going into the model shop just about had to go past my office. Huh. And they were open cubicles. They were divided, but you had like low cubicle walls, and people would always stick their head into my cubicle and everyone else's cubicle there. And as soon as I got assignments that were, involved some design, which I wasn't expecting, people would come by, and, Claude Coates would come by, Mark, not Mark as much. In fact, I think Mark had just left his, he retired in 77, I think, or 78. And then they brought him back to work on World of Motion. And then I think he had just finished his gig on World of Motion when I came in. And, but I just, there were a lot of art directors because there were 10 of us show set designers out there in this kind of bullpen area. And show set design was where the rubber hit the road. That's where concept sketches, models, architecture, show set design, all of that was kind of came together. So there were two places where art directors would go to see how things were coming along. And one was the model shop and one was show set design, also upstairs to the architecture area. But the show set design seemed to always have a lot of traffic in it because you were either about to give something to the model shop for them to build, or they were giving you something to draw up. And so a lot of back and forth always went on between show set design and the model shop. That's where a good deal of the design would take place. And I was working initially on World of Motion, and Claude came by a couple times, but other people, the World of Motion was the pavilion of never-ending art directors in my mind at the time. So I knew Claude was in name the art director for the ride, but there were other people that seemed to have appropriated that title, at least in their own minds. And they would come by and they would critique what I was doing. And one of them, I believe, was Bob Clatworthy, who is he's not known as being an Imagineer. He's known as being probably an Oscar-winning art director. He was a big-time art director. He was the art director of Pollyanna, for example.
Oh, okay.
One of the Hall of Fame art directors, and he went on to do Bonnie and Clyde and some other films. But he was at Disney for about 4 or 5 years in the 60s. And then he was one of the people that they had brought in to work on EPCOT. Jack Martin Smith was another one. All these guys seem to always be around our area. Colin Campbell, was one that was often around. And they'd be shooting the breeze with, everyone. And there was a lot of breeze shooting.
Well, you talk about World of Motion. I mean, another name associated with that you probably knew was Ward Kimball.
Yeah.
Who wasn't involved that much in Imagineering. Did you ever encounter him there?
Yeah. He came by a couple of times. I remember, and looked at what I was doing. I think he was looking at this balloon scene that I was working on. The first thing I was asked to work on World of Motion was the used chariot salesman scene. I don't know what you call that.
Right. Yeah.
But they wanted a Chinese temple, a Chinese pagoda, and a Greek temple. So this is like one area that was not my forte at all. I had kind of like gotten in school, and the reason I got this job was because in high school drafting, I had taken 3 years of high school drafting, and I had done some, themed design for houses and office buildings. And I did like an office building that was space age, and I did a vacation home that was ye old, Tyrolean Fantasyland. And I think I did like a frontier thing, and I probably did an adventure thing, right? So all of a sudden, here's a Greek temple, and I'm like, I don't know. And I have research books and everything. So I do a Greek temple, and I do a Chinese pagoda. And I know that Ward came by and looked at those, and he was okay with them. And there was a guy who was in charge, a manager kind of guy in charge of the architects. And he came by and started critiquing what I was doing. And he said, Greek temples never had an odd number of columns. I didn't look at that section of Donald and Math Magic Land long enough to remember if there was an even amount or an odd amount of columns. And I think I had 5 columns instead of 6 or 8. So, and I'm like, well, what do I do now? And this guy's like, you need to change that. And I asked my boss, I go, do I need to change that? And he goes, no. Well, ask Claude or Ward. It was probably Ward, and Ward didn't give a shit,
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks fine. Like, so that was that. And the model shop built them, and then the Tahunga built the full-size ones. And then, it's funny that I looked at them as I went through the World of Motion a couple times, and it just didn't faze me like, gosh, I did those, I probably what happened was it's like, ooh, I could have done a better job than what I did. It was probably kind of Ernie Bushmiller level work that I did. But then the hot air balloon scene, I came up with an idea and actually did like some pencil sketches for it. And Claude felt that the gag point was a little too ambiguous, maybe, or not clearly readable. So the gag was that the guy is up in the hot air balloon and he's flying over a French little town, and there's a steeple, the top of a steeple, because you're up in the air with him, right? So the village is below, you're only seeing rooftops. And there's a steeple and there's a guy, a French soldier with a sword, and the balloon is about to hit that steeple and pop the balloon with the sword. And there was a goat in it, and the goat's like trying to tell the guy who's oblivious. And so Claude said it was a little too busy, and why don't you work on the roofs, which meant I'll find someone to get the gag.
Yeah.
And so I designed the rooftops, and it was a little half timber job, which was something that was up my alley. And I don't know if they brought Mark back to do that, but they ended up with the guy and the pig. So it was kind of my idea. But the original idea that I inherited was they were just going to project all these different balloons in the air. So it'd be like a collage of all these funny different hot air balloons through time,
Yeah.
And then someone above my pay grade had decided that was not good enough, or, that it needed to be another animatronic scene and not just projections. So I don't know who was making the decisions.
Yeah, because they would kind of do projections for those in-between scenes with
right.
The wheel
This was,
and everything.
kind of this was like bigger than an in-between and smaller than a typical scene.
Yeah.
And you're in it for like 6 seconds.
Yeah, but a memorable scene, and one of those scenes that always made it into the promo videos or the postcards or the pan of view slides. Oh yeah,
really?
Yeah. Well, as you said, there were a lot of hands in the world of motion pot. Mark Davis, Ward Kimball, Claude Coates, other people you mentioned. Did that seem typical of the EPCOT shows from your perspective at the time? That there was, or was there a real guiding voice to it all, or was it just kind of whoever you talk to do what they say?
In some ways, it was a little bit of the second. That there was a lot of people kind of assuming their position, but then there were certain pavilions that was clearly this person's domain. Some of the pavilions had, I guess, more clear organizational setups. But you weren't really supposed to talk about it, I guess, or, it's like, it's all a team effort, okay. Who's in charge? It's a team effort. Okay. They didn't really say that, but it was, it seemed like some of the areas had a little bit more of that than others. And others were like, like the Mexico Pavilion was Eddie Martinez's domain, and it was Eddie Martinez and Ray Aragon. And then someone that they had brought over from a university who was like a anthropologist or something. And that was that was the top of the pyramid at literally for Mexico.
Yeah.
They had a pyramid. It was very clear who was in charge of what there. And I think it was just varying degrees, with all the other pavilions. Land Pavilion was pretty clear. Well, it was, let's see, the Land Pavilion was Rowley, but then Rowley left. So then I think it was Doris Woodward Hardoon,
right,
who was I know she was the field art director on it. So it really became her baby. And I designed something for her in that pavilion. It was like an overnight thing, a phone booth, a phone area, farmer's market.
Yeah.
She was very definitely in charge of the Land Pavilion. So, and the Seas, that was, not there for opening day, but it was still being in the process of being designed, was, a Tim Delaney production.
Right.
Early.
Yeah.
Spaceship Earth was, I think, ambiguous. And, the degree of ambiguity didn't seem to have an effect one way or the other. Like, there were ambiguously led pavilions that came out great and vice versa. So,
right. It's just always been interesting to look back, and there are pavilions that you associate very specifically, such as one we're about to talk about, with a person or a creative team, and others, even someone who's followed Epcot pretty closely, like me, really doesn't know who worked on
Right.
Spaceship Earth. As you said, it's very ambiguous.
Yeah, John O'Lim. I think that's the name that jumps out to me for Spaceship Earth was John O'Lim, and in the early phases, Claudio Mazzoli, doing the very early concept work for it, and a guy named Richard Vaughn, very talented guy from the model shop, and became a production designer, younger guy. I associate him very strongly with it. I know there's others, but
yeah.
But it was still kind of ambiguous. He didn't quite, know who. If one of those persons came around and gave you a direction to change something, that's I think you'd have to go, well, who do I listen to this person or not? You'd have to
right.
You'd have to take that one up. You'd have to elevate that. You'd go to your boss and say, so and so came by and wants to change this thing. I wouldn't know on Spaceship Earth who would be the person who
you would go to. Well, you mentioned all these top level art directors, and it's clear that one of their real goals in Epcot was to bring in top name art director talent from really the golden age of Hollywood.
Right.
And that has been something I have just learned about in recent years. All these people, everybody who worked on The Wizard of Oz, and all these people from MGM and Fox and everywhere. How did those people blend into the Disney system? Did that seem like a smooth mixture?
They seem to be more focused on paintings, producing paintings, producing concept art, and not necessarily in the middle of the design exercise. Now there were exceptions to that, but I'm thinking of like Jack Martin Smith. I think he was working on energy, and I think he was providing, providing artwork, paintings, and I don't know how skilled some of these people were in the dimensional world of translating things from paintings to 3 dimensions. And that's always been the rub, right? And so I think Clem Hall got it, and I think he was working on storyboards for American Adventure. But a lot of the guys ended up doing artwork for the American Adventure, the final murals that you see in the show. Guy Deal and Walter Tyler, and Walter Tyler was there. He was another big one. And and it's kind of interesting because I think the connection to some of them was that some of them landed at the Disney studio in the 70s because the other studios had just shut down completely. Either shut down like MGM or shut down their art departments. And so here's a talent like Jack Martin Smith or Walter Tyler, and now they're at the Disney studio doing a really good job on Snowball Express and things like that. Walter Tyler, was the art director on Snowball Express, and Jack Martin Smith was the art director on Pete's Dragon. And, they were still doing really beautiful sets for films that were kind of, hit and miss. Same, I guess, with Bob Cloutworthy. There was Gene Johnson. These are all kind of at different levels. John DeCure, of course.
Right.
And John DeCure Jr. But they were mostly, my impression was that they were mostly producing paintings, kind of concept paintings or sales paintings. That a lot of the work was used to get the deal, that the renderings made the rounds at the different governments of the countries and the big companies and everything like that. But they weren't always usable as design tools, for final design.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, your big Epcot project was Journey into Imagination, a much beloved attraction. And, you worked on that obviously with Tony Baxter. Throughout your career at Imagineering, you did work a lot with Tony Baxter.
Yeah.
How did you two meet? And can you just tell us a little bit about Tony?
I think we met, if it wasn't at Disneyland, it was through a common friend of ours who worked at Disneyland, who was a very nice guy, is a very nice guy. His name's Don Bobs. And so I think Don introduced me to Tony either at Disneyland or somewhere. And we just became kind of casual friends. Like, if he'd be in the park, then, I'd wave over to him and he'd come over and we'd chat for a while. And then it got to the point where sometimes he'd invite me along with some of his other friends to his place to watch movies, because he's always had this magnificent movie, state-of-the-art movie set up at his home. And I'm still in high school. I'm like a junior and a senior in high school.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, because I'm interested in film, I'm interested in architecture, I'm interested in animation, and I'm interested in Imagineering, but there's no classes hardly for the things that I'm interested in. I mean, film, yes, but, hard to get into those classes and also expensive to get into those classes. No, there was no such thing to my understanding as a production design for film class. Now, as it turns out, there were a couple, but without benefit of the internet, how do you know this without, writing letters to every college? And, my counselors didn't know anything about the entertainment business. They were trying to get everyone into aerospace and, business, and
right.
Be a doctor, be a lawyer, all of that. And so I went to a very good high school, but it wasn't the high school to go, had virtually no connection to the entertainment world. So I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And Tony gave me a tour of WED when I was, I think, a senior, like just the very beginning of my senior year, gave me a tour of WED. And it blew my mind, it's just like, wow, this is what I want to do. But I think I had already, and where do you go to be an Imagineer? It's a question that's still difficult to answer.
Right.
And what I tell people is you have to find something to be really good at to get your foot in the door. And then, in my opinion, a real Imagineer figures out once they're there what they need to do, what they can do, what they're able to do. So that's what I did, I guess. My portfolio was, I didn't apply. I didn't raise my hand and say, pick me to, work there. They were, they had headhunters at Disneyland because they had announced Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland. And now they needed people of every discipline and skill, not just artists, but, a lot of architects and draftsmen, but not just that. They needed schedulers and planners and project managers and scope writers and all these things. And my portfolio was high school. I mean, I had stuff that I had done in college, illustrations that were pretty damn good, but they were interested in my drafting from high school because it was like, we need draftsmen. This guy can draft.
Right. Yeah.
That's all it was. Getting back to Tony, he, I think he encouraged my submitting the portfolio and taking the interview and taking the job. And the timing, he was right. The timing was right. I started off doing grunt work like everyone does and should. And, in not long, I'm doing, some minor design work for the World of Motion. But all of a sudden, the Imagination Pavilion falls out of the sky, drops down. And because it had been something that had been kind of just showed up on the radar the year before, but not as an opening day attraction. And so there were a couple plans that had, just a circle designated on it that would say images and imagination. Well, I guess just one day something happened. I think Card Walker was very good friends with, I think this is what happened, was that Card Walker was great friends with Kay Whitmore, I think his name was, from Kodak, who was the CEO of Kodak. And so they had a lunch or something, and Kodak got excited about this images and imagination thing. And suddenly there's a project, well, not a funded project, but there's, to do some concept and feasibility work for this thing. And the reason why the timing worked out good was because Tony was selected to be the art director for it, the creative lead. He was very busy at Disneyland finishing up on Big Thunder. I remember he suddenly had to, by the way, I didn't see Tony for like 3 months when I first started because he was at Disneyland all the time working at Big
Right.
So all of a sudden he shows up one day and says, how would you like to work on this images and imagination pavilion that might be sponsored by Kodak? That sounds like fun, And so he put together a team of people, including Barry Braverman. I mean, people much more, talented than I was at the time and experienced, I guess. And so there was Barry Braverman and Bob Rogers and a great matte artist from the studio named Michael Lloyd, who was apprenticed under Peter Ellenshaw.
Oh, wow.
And who else was on this? Oh, Rick Harper, and Steve Kirk. All these people with talent.
Gosh.
And then there was me, And the reason I was there was because they had no architects available. Everyone was scrambling to get all the other pavilions finished. And I think they began a search for an architect, but also for show set design to lay out, an attraction. And so it may have been through default, or it could have been because they specifically wanted me to work on this, or Tony specifically wanted me to work on it. But I'm in all of this, story sessions and creative concept blue sky sessions for this. And my job really is to begin laying it out, but also to contribute ideas. And I made attempts at doing some concept designs for some scenes and also for the exterior. I badly wanted to design the exterior because I thought, well, these guys are all good kind of interior or idea sketch artists, but they're not really like architects or have an architectural knowledge. And I was not an architect either, by the way. But having taken 3 years of drafting and having designed a few buildings, I did know how to spatially manage the design of a building. And, long story short, I mean, I ended up kind of designing the building, kind of. They didn't necessarily warm to my sketches that I did for the facade of it. But they, I'm trying to think, so what happened was Dan Gouze did a really cool sketch of the crystals that we know today, that kind of truncated trapezoidal pyramids, which I didn't know at the time until it opened that they were supposed to be evocative of silver halide crystals.
Right. Yeah.
But everyone liked this simple marker sketch that he had done. And so then he did that famous painting of it, and everyone loved it. But we needed to build a model for this project because there was going to be a meeting coming up with Kodak in the, maybe it was the end of summer of 79, in the fall, and still no architect. And so they needed to build a model. And so I was the one who ended up kind of translating Dan Gouze's sketch of those crystals, plus whatever I was laying out, from a layout standpoint, into something that the model builders could build a model of, at least.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you whether the building could stand up or not, but I could give them the drawings that they needed to build the model from. And so that's what I did. And by the time we got an architect, it was kind of, it was pretty much designed. Not so much the look of the 3D theater, but, the layout of the ride, the way the crystals, the geometry of the crystals, and the spiral staircase, all of that, which I did not do the final spiral staircase, but just how everything laid out, basically.
Right.
But the difference was that I had the exit on the upper level. So the cars let you out and unloaded on the second level immediately into the Imageworks. Makes sense. Right?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Not only that, but, and this is probably where the straw broke the camel's back, but we had a second turntable. So the first turntable was as you know it or knew it. And then there was going to be a wrap up, this is what you saw. And here's,
right. Yeah.
Now go forth.
Makes sense.
Now go forth into the Imageworks and create.
Right.
And that was on the second level. Well, that was, too expensive. That's where my, I might understand space and architecture, but I didn't understand structure, structural engineering. I was not a structural engineer. So we had that thing on the second floor. And I mean, just, it didn't even on the top or where it was. There was too much. And so we had to cut out, we had to do a big cut and cut out some money. And we did that, and we lost the second turntable. But unfortunately, we lost the unloading, which I think would have been a really great thing, and probably wouldn't have been that much more money. But we lost that. We lost the unload and go right out into the Imageworks, and it was a problem on at first when it opened, that people didn't know that they were supposed to go upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because I remember there being so much directional signage once you got out of the ride. Like, follow Figment to the Imageworks, and Figment around the corner pointing up to the
graphic
Imageworks.
Artist, the graphic designer. I didn't do the final working construction drawings, tight lines, but I did all of the comps for all of those signs. Follow Figment, and
oh wow,
that was my punishment.
Iconic work.
The post opening, I was the guy left holding the bag out there. And the ride didn't open on opening day. So I was the guy left out there and dealing with just the punch list items from Imageworks was huge. People didn't know where to go in the Imageworks, and they didn't know how to do. So, and you don't want to have to rely on signs to tell you how to do things. It should all be intuitive, but not every activity up there was 100% intuitive. Or people didn't know that there was something cool behind, the digital wall, that there was a stepping tones room back there.
Right. Yeah. Because there was a lot.
And worst of all was the Magic Palette, which not only had some technical problems with the wands, which, they eventually took care of, but people didn't know what to do. There was no such thing as Photoshop or anything like that. So they'd pick up the wand and they didn't know what to do with it. And it wasn't clear. It wasn't clear. And the interface was kind of silly. It was like this is when all the computer geniuses of the world were debating and kind of battling about what the right interfaces for, computer work.
Right.
Balls versus joysticks and someone came up with the idea of putting your finger in a slot with a touch sensitive pad in it, I guess. And no one knew what to do with that.
I remember him just being kind of gunked up.
Once they got to the screen and got to the menu, they didn't know what to do. So I came up with the on-screen instructions for how to use the and I did this by watching how people were using it and behaving. This was like one of the first, opportunities and really, beneficial opportunities to observe guest behavior and how guests really work with things and do things. And so after just watching people for a week, I came up with these instructions that I assume worked. I could never judge whether they worked or not because because I came up with them.
You knew too much.
Yeah, I knew too much. So, but it seemed like it all worked. And then years later, like I still curse Photoshop to this day. I hate it. I try to do as much as I can on Keynote. But I was telling this story to some computer guy, and he said, well, effectively what you did was you created the first tutorial.
Yeah.
For a Photoshop kind of a thing, because it was, a totally new idea. There was no Photoshop or anything like that. So it was the introduction of, in a crude way, of the idea. And so that's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah, I've seen some of those punch lists from like mid 1983, and it's pretty wild, the things you guys were having to do, and pretty much everything in the image work, everything from we need signs for the Lumia and this and that, or the pin screens are too sharp.
Yeah.
or
we took the signs off of the pin screens because they said, put your fingers under me, touch is the key to creativity. We took those off. People were getting the wrong idea, I guess.
Yeah. A little too creative.
Yeah.
What was it like finishing the pavilion up even after the park had opened? I mean, working in the field is hard enough, but working in a park that's operational.
Oh, it was very hard. And it was, we hadn't really been trained how to deal with operations during the kind of turnover period. And there wasn't a clear turnover period is the problem. I mean, there was maybe for ImageWorks and for the movie, but the ride, I guess it was turned over, but we still had work to do. So we had to work around the cycling of the vehicles. And I remember a lot of midnight work that we had to do. I think at first let's see, they made a decision. It was probably in September, I'm guessing, that they made the decision not to open the ride on opening day, to focus everything else on the rest of the pavilion. And as soon as that decision was made, and it was made only because there weren't available ride engineers to work on it. They were all on Spaceship Earth and Universe of Energy. Mm-hmm. And so the moment that decision was made, the air went out of the tires on Imagination. And so I don't think it seemed like it was quite a while before they started cycling it. And so there was some time to, get things finished up in there. And it was like, I'd have to go back and look at the photos because I took photos in there. And it seems like we got, like 90% of it done right after EPCOT opened. And had you been able to cycle the vehicles through it, it would have been pretty close to being done. And we did actually cycle it for the Kodak people in December.
Oh, wow.
For the official opening of the pavilion, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So, they were there in December. There was a big to-do with Kodak in December, and they got to ride on the ride. I remember that. And then they left, and I was busier than heck because everyone went home. And it was just me, and Dave Mitichello was a local out there, and it was me and Dave, and he was probably fixing stuff on Land Pavilion and other things. So I was working very closely with Tom Turley, if you remember Tom, a supervisor out there. He was in charge of I think he had the west side of EPCOT, the side of EPCOT,
right,
Land and Imagination. And I worked with him on all of these operational signage issues. And there were other kind of operational issues too. So I was like going back and forth between, Glendale memo wise, with all these various different issues. And, I have all those files. Those are some of the only files that seem to have made all of the different moves without,
great.
Every time I moved to another location, Paris or Hong Kong or the other side of the campus in Glendale, there'd be one less box. There was like a sacrifice.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And so over time, I lost the Bill Martin box, and I lost a few memo boxes, and I probably threw some away because, like, who cares? But I have the imagination. I think I have all of those memos. I don't think I've ever gone through and read all of them yet.
Yeah.
Some of them every now and then, maybe every couple of years I go in there and I'll read a couple, but I should do that. But that's where all that information is. I gave all of the sketches, I do everything on tissue paper, or I did back then. And that was my Photoshop, my way of doing Photoshop. Tissue paper overlay, tissue paper, iterate, So I gave all of the artwork to the WDI library a few years ago. And I don't know if they've gotten around to scanning it because it's difficult to scan tissue. So I'd love to see some of that stuff again. That's where I had all of those instructional graphics and follow Figment to the ImageWorks and all of that with pen and colored pencil, I think, markers.
I've been looking at some of the early proposals for what was then called the Images and Imagination Pavilion, which became Journey into Imagination. At first, it seems the ride was a lot more film-based. In fact, it doesn't seem to originally have had Figment and Dreamfinder at all. Can you talk a little about how that show developed over time?
Well, I don't remember too much when it was all film-based. As far as I know, and I was there in all of the original meetings, it was always envisioned as a dimensional, practical set, maybe with some, film, occasional, film effects. But, and that was a stipulation of Kodak's, as I recall, is that there would be portions of the attraction that would showcase photography or motion photography, which is, you'll see that in the science section where the slowing down of time, or the micro macro worlds that only the camera can capture. The micro worlds, the macro worlds, the sped up worlds, and the slowed down worlds. So that was the point of that. But it was, for the most part, it was envisioned as a dimensional practical set show. And then Figment and Dreamfinder, as I recall, came just a little bit later. One of these days I got to sit down and go through all my memos and create a timeline for it, which I haven't done yet because it just hasn't been. I've just had, I'm further back. I'm back in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
With all of my timelining and researching and everything. But I would say it was probably 3 or 4 months until Figment and Dreamfinder came along.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing I admire about Tony Baxter is when he gets an idea he likes, he really never gives up on it and keeps trying to somehow get it into the park some way or another. Right. And we see that in Imagination. I've seen some of the, early around 1979, where Dreamfinder was still called Professor Marvel, which was the name of his character when it was part of Discovery Bay.
Right. And the Land Pavilion, I think.
Yeah, when they had the Land Keeper or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. And then, hauling out the crystals was probably my, doing. I wasn't asked to do that, but I liked that, original Land Pavilion that he came up with, that Tony and his team came up with. I saw that when I was maybe still in high school, and Tony gave me a tour of WED, and so they were working on that, and I thought that was just so cool. And then, was kind of disappointed when that went away for the Land Pavilion. So I thought it made perfect sense for Imagination. And he was probably even avoiding doing that, being overt about it, about bringing the crystals, into the architecture, because I imagine he didn't want to get accused of, never letting go of something.
Yeah.
But I was doing these okay, crystal sketches, and then Dan Guzet did his, and that was the end of it. That was like, okay, done.
Right. So you had the ride, you had the 3D movie seems to have been there from the start. And there was this area called Perception Park, which was a nice, elaborate little park there in the middle.
Right. It was Imagination Gardens for a while, Perception Park. And that was kind of the fourth element that we had to sadly give up. But although the leapfrog fountains and, there's a couple vestiges there were a couple vestiges. I guess they're still there. The pop jet fountain with Figment, but that was going to be a big praxinoscope, I think.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah, there were going to be all sorts of optical illusions, but something had to give, so that was what gave.
Right. Yeah.
Well, as we said before and after the pavilion opened, you were on site for quite some time working with Pico on Imagination. And as envious as some would be of you for being in the construction there, you lived one of my greatest dreams by taking up residence in Fort Wilderness for the duration of your stay. How did you find Fort Wilderness? Can you talk about your stay there?
I love it. Oh, well, I don't know how I would think about it as, in my present day. Although Orlando Ferrante, he loved that. He was my next door neighbor on Bobcat Bend. I was at 2136 Bobcat Bend.
Oh, wow.
And I guess he had that. I guess he had his trailer forever. We were all kind of newbies on the loop, but he had that trailer there for some time, and he loved just being there. And for me, it was a step up too. As a bachelor, living in dorms or with roommates, in apartments and stuff like that. Sure. This was, it was great. Yeah. And I loved the environment. I really, really loved the environment of it. I had a stream in the backyard, and, they were just surrounded by trees, and everything was wonderful. And, I saw little baby gators from time to time, but I never saw any of the things that I had, heard to watch out for, like rattlesnakes, and even worse than that, coral snakes, which I was reading one night in a magazine, and it said that, coral snakes are among the most poisonous animals in the world. And the highest concentration of them are in Central Florida. They just love to hide and bask under the leaves. And I'm thinking, gosh, every 3 or 4 days when I go to the laundry room, which is in the center of each loop,
right,
across all these leaves, I don't take the path. I take the shortcut, which is right through the leaves. And so I stopped doing that and started taking the path, the man-made path, after I read that. And then the water moccasins.
Oh, man.
That too, which I did see.
Ooh.
I did see one of those one time on Bay Lake.
Florida life there.
Yeah. But I love living in the campground. It was really wonderful.
What was life like on the EPCOT site? How did you spend your time? I know you were probably working pretty long days, probably pretty busy. What was that life like for you, just sort of day to day?
Every day was hearing a call on the radio, responding to a call on the radio, because we used these things called radios back then. They might even still use them, I don't know, but we didn't have them on Hong Kong Disneyland. We just used our phones. But back then, we all had radios, and I was production 45, I think. And hear production 45 from production 5 or Pico 5 or whatever. And there'd be some issue, some problem, some conflict, architecturally or structurally with, something that is about to be installed or was just installed in the wrong location. And you'd run out and you'd talk with, there'd be a little huddle out there. And then usually I would have to draw up a solution on I guess they were just called change orders, of which I still have, I think, most of the ones, or at least I kept the interesting ones. And you had to do that quickly. You couldn't put that off on the side and come back to it 3 or 4 days later. Most of the time there was someone waiting, with a welding torch or with wet cement or something. So you had to, run back and draw up a solution and then describe it which I found very interesting. As a communications major, that was very advantageous because I learned to write instructions or directions very clearly, so that there was no ambiguity whatsoever. And I was shocked at how many that I'd read. I'd get one from someone else, and I'm like, this could be interpreted 5 different ways.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So half of it was wording it so that everyone who was on the CC list would get it and not have to call. And as we got closer and closer to opening day, the phones were ringing off the hook, radios. You couldn't even get time in the radio. There was too much chatter on the radio. And so, I would spend a lot of time, not too much time, but I would spend the appropriate amount of time on a change order or on a directive so that it was visually clear and verbally clear. And that was probably 80% of the job. And sometimes I was borrowed a lot on Land Pavilion, not a lot, but, from time to time, I'd go out to the Land Pavilion because it was adjacent. And there were, the coordinators were adjacent, and it just seemed to be a thing that made sense. I don't remember going out on many other, like World of Motion or Energy. I don't think it was 90% imagination and 10% Land Pavilion. And 80% of the overall time was spent on, I would say, on these change orders or directives.
I would imagine as complex a project, it was always something like that, always something popping up.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And then I guess it would then start to, as we got to October, and it was clear that the ride was not going to open, that had already been decided that it would be postponed until after the year. So then, with the exception of Imageworks, which was still a rush to open on opening day, I transitioned into art direction, or assistant art direction. Because Skip Lang was really, I would say, the number one guy that Tony trusted in the field. And Skip and Tony go way back, to Big Thunder days. And so Tony always trusted Skip. So Skip was kind of the de facto, or no, he was the art director for both Imageworks, the field art director for Imageworks and the ride. But he had to go back from time to time to California, especially around the holidays. So as the holidays came up, I became kind of the de facto field art director, although things weren't moving fast on the ride, but little things here and there. And, placement of the final animation and some programming issues and things like that. So, yeah, as we got closer to October 1 and then after October 1, it became more of two things, more of a de facto field art director, and then also all of the signage issues and wayfinding issues, which were a problem in that pavilion.
Right. Well, it's been 20 years, a little more than 20 years since Journey into Imagination closed. But Figment is as popular as ever. There is a whole new generation of fans who never even experienced that attraction, but are obsessed with it. I think it's fair to say. There are documentaries about it. There's, a digital recreation that's happening.
Yeah,
and,
right.
As someone who worked on that show, how has it felt to watch this sense of reverence develop around it?
It's kind of interesting because I, didn't really develop the fanboy attitude towards that attraction. Although, I dearly loved it, but it was more of a professional work affinity than it was. I wasn't crazy about it like I was crazy about Pirates of the Caribbean,
right,
or Haunted Mansion. And I didn't know whether people were, it was hard for me to gauge because I would watch people once Imageworks opened, and then once the attraction opened, I would observe. There were certain little points in the ride where you could hide out and watch people. And I did that on my breaks, and because I was really interested to see how people would react to the show, react to certain things as we adjusted either dialogue or audio or lighting or some effect. When you're working on it from the very beginning, from inception to putting the rivets on the dream catching machine, it's exciting. It's the best job in the world, but you don't ever quite get to enjoy the show the way, a guest with no knowledge whatsoever of what's going to happen. And I would morose about things, about, things that weren't quite right, didn't look quite right, couldn't get them ever to get, there's always some little effect or some little thing that just won't fix,
Right.
And no matter how much time you spend on it, it still won't fix. There's something substantially or structurally, wrong with it that it won't unless you tear it all out and start over again.
Yeah.
So, there were a couple of those in there, and I just wish I didn't know any of that.
Well, what were some of those? What were some of those unfixable things?
Well, the fiber optics for the in the dream port, at the end of the dream port, you see the dream finder Figment putting the flowers into the big pot, and then there's this rainbow that's coming down, and that's a fiber optic effect that broke either before or during installation. It snapped or cracked, and when that happens on a fiber bundle like that, that's the end of the. Well, it didn't completely kill it, but I would say 2/3 of the fibers, I think, were damaged. And so that effect never really read. Plus, it was overlit. That whole corner was overlit. And that big polage, we had never done a gigantic polage like that. So I think we gave it a best guess as to how it could work with all of these different lights and wheels but they all canceled each other out. So you didn't get the effect of it, of it being completely clear or black and white or white on white, and then from right to left changing into color. That never worked.
Interesting.
It never worked because you would have had to not do it with a bunch of wheels. So you had to have done it with a big gigantic wheel.
Yeah.
Or two big gigantic wheels. So that, was always kind of a mishmash thing. And I never liked, you're going to kill me. I didn't like the aroma. I didn't like the smell of that Smellitzer.
Oh, really?
I don't think Tony did either, or maybe he was just going along with me, but I said it just smelled like everyone's got an aunt or grandma who puts too much rose perfume on.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I know. And it's like, we got to change it. And we wanted something more like honeysuckle or sweet, something not quite so acrid. And it was one of those things that either you can't do it because you'd have to change out all of the ducts to do it. And you wouldn't think that would be that expensive, but it could be that the ducts were in places that you couldn't get to, perhaps. Or it could have been some institutional stubbornness on the part of someone who was like, I made that smell.
Yeah, right.
I created, that's my own recipe. And by God, I'm not changing it.
It's my favorite aunt. And
yes, my favorite aunt. So I never knew what the real reason for that, but it was on our punch list for like 4 or 5 years, and then we just gave up.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, it's so funny.
Oh, I love that smell. I love it. And for me, it smells like angst because it smells like we can't get this effect fixed. That whole corner with that little rainbow flume, and then the pelage and the smell, that whole corner did not come out the way it was supposed to come out.
That's so funny. And I guarantee you, if you put a photo up of that scene up on Twitter, everybody would go nuts about how much they love that scene. So
I know.
it's just the
Oh,
designer's eye from the
yeah,
trenches
exactly.
is very different.
Yep. So that's why working on a project from beginning to end is, it has a frustration unless you're lucky to get everything right, and enough money and time to get everything right. Journey into Imagination was the last pavilion, on the original docket to open and to get started. And so it was always a little behind schedule. And when you're behind schedule, you got to wing some things. And so sometimes you get a good hand, and sometimes you get blackjack, and sometimes you get just a crummy hand.
Yeah.
So we did the best. We made the best with what we had, and it was spectacular. And I took everyone's word, for it over time. Like,
Good.
oh, good, because I was always worried about it. Like that just wasn't, I didn't see the visual expressive response that I had hoped in viewing guests on the ride. And I'd go to the exit, and it was generally a good response. But that last scene also, that was another one that didn't work very well for the first few years. That was the first, we're on a big screen.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, everybody, look, we're on a big, and it didn't work very well. And it was grainy, and it was often out of phase and out of sync. And, Splash Mountain is a great photo capture moment because everyone's going, as they go down. Here, everyone's like going 1.5 feet per second as it slows down to come in to unload. And they're all kind of, they don't know. They're waiting kind of for something to happen. So they all have this kind of, what's happening?
Right.
And so but just before that, in the film reel section, the kids are going nuts because they're seeing all of the different figments up on the reel. And so it's like, that's where it should have stopped until the technology could get there for the big screen thing. Yeah, and I don't actually know how, when it closed, I don't know how, I know that I always heard that they made improvements to it, but I can't remember whether, the improvements were still kind of adequate enough to make people come off the ride jumping for joy.
Yeah. Well, I think people were always amused, especially because it was such a new technology at the time. Even though the photo wasn't of them being like excited or whatever, the amusement of seeing the photo sort of more than made up for that. And especially over the years, as people knew it was coming and could kind of, ham it up for the camera, then I think that made a difference too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it definitely, having it in the proper timing, was number one. Because if you're like looking at someone else, a lot of times it would be late, so you just go around the corner and then you'd come up, or too early and you didn't know to look early enough. So I'm sure they got that part of it all settled, but the definition, the lighting, the definition, all these things have to come together so that it looks like a movie. You're a star, you're in the film and not on a closed circuit TV camera,
right?
Screen that's
thumbnail resolution. Although that was cool at the time. So.
And it would tile sometimes too, and so yeah, it was all fun, but I am so glad, to begin hearing. It wasn't until about 5 or 6 years after it opened that I started to hear, oh, we really love that attraction. It's our favorite attraction. And that's the one that we go back to all the time. Because, in the first couple of years, everyone's trying everything out.
Yeah.
And there aren't very many people that have been there enough times to have, developed an affinity for one particular thing or another. So it was good to begin to get that feedback. Right. And then I was just totally busy on other stuff. Like Disney Quest and Europe, that I hardly even knew they were redoing it.
Right. Well, and that's a story. I mean, that's
yeah.
a saga. I mean, it just shows people's response to the replacement shows how big a shadow the original cast, because it's something people still talk about 20 plus years after.
Oh yeah,
That they want that ride back. They
yeah,
miss it a lot.
yeah. The architect Chad Oppenheim mentioned it. He's a big architect down in Miami, and he's done some really amazing things. And he mentioned that as kind of like the moment where he decided he wanted to be creative. When he was like 10 years old when he went on
That's
and said,
awesome.
I want my job to be, creative. And then he'd walk around Epcot and he goes, I like these buildings. I want to make really cool buildings.
Oh, that's neat. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, I think a lot of us do what we do because of Epcot. Weirdly enough, there are a lot
Yeah.
of us out there. Well, after
Yeah.
Epcot, you worked on a number of projects for Disneyland. A lot of that work was trying to figure out a plan for Tomorrowland.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that were under consideration at that time for that area?
Well, I had always been mesmerized by that John Hench rendering that's kind of yellowish, that
Yeah.
has 3 levels, I think, in it, at least 2 levels, but I think there's actually like 3 levels in it. And I just thought that was super cool. Like Tomorrowland needed that energy level. Like how do you take Tomorrowland to the next level? Build more levels.
Yeah.
So I was working with Tony on that, and they had just let a whole bunch of people go because it was 1984 now. 83. Sometime in there, I started working on Splash Mountain also. So I can't remember now the order, but I know that towards the end of 83 is when I began working on Splash, and then also New Tomorrowland. And so I would help Tony come up with layouts, and came up with a few layouts that had this 3-story deal going on. And it did that by creating a lower level between the Circle Vision building and the Adventure Through Inner Space building. Drop down into like a garden, with fountains and stuff like that, and like a resting space. And but that was all expensive, so that went away. And then I was coming up with other plans that still had that kind of second walkway that would be kind of around where the People Mover is going. I can't remember now. I have to look at one of the plans to see. I think we rerouted. There were some plans where we rerouted the People Mover. But the big thing was putting a Star Wars-esque thrill attraction somewhere. So that was really kind of what was helping drive that. And also the fact that although it wasn't doing poorly, or maybe it was, America Sings was kind of now time, it was time for that to change as well. And so people began thinking about what could be put in that building and what could be put in the Mission to Mars building.
Yeah.
And but it was not Star Tours yet. It was Star Wars in a box that replaced the Autopia, the Tomorrowland Autopia. And so I worked on plans for that and architecture for that. And then we built a model of it. And then Tony took it up. I think he took the model up. He either took the model up or Ron Miller came down, and we showed it to Ron because Ron was the person who was talking to George Lucas.
Really?
And then it went quiet for a while. And that's probably when I went 100% into Splash Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really kind of a cool thing. But we were looking at putting it between the Haunted Mansion and Pirates, behind the railroad tracks, in an area that is currently occupied by chiller plants and substations, infrastructure, big block buildings, utility buildings. But it didn't seem, like it was an insurmountable thing. It looked like we could deck over it. So I came up with some plans for, I don't think it was quite zippity doo dah yet. I think we were maybe still searching for what the actual story would be, but it was just, how do we get a flume ride that is longer and a little taller and more elaborate than the one at Knott's Berry Farm, because that was
Yeah.
that was the gold standard for flume rides. And Dick Nunes had been wanting to put a flume ride in for quite some time. And someone had done, another team had done, what was it called? Something Express. Another team had done, I think it was a bear themed flume ride, and it was in bear country. I don't know if it was kind of built up on the berm behind or maybe it was designed before bear country went in. Anyway, there was not a place for it. It was like a concept that had no place. And it also featured, there were a lot of like guns in a rifle shooting.
Yeah.
It was kind of a, what do you call it? The two families that were feuding. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, the Hatfield and McCoy kind of
and the
thing.
McCoys, yeah. And so there was a little bit of that element. And even early back then, I think there was some discomfort with that. I don't know actually why. This previous team came up with something that was, pretty cool, but then it was given to Tony, and we wanted to make it, really cool. And so we looked at this area behind the railroad tracks in New Orleans Square, and that didn't pan out because the cost to deck over the utilities, the big substations and everything back there was too expensive. Today, that would be like nothing.
Yeah.
But back then, that was, a lot of money. And I think, I'd come up with a scheme where there was a grand staircase, kind of Hello Dolly-esque, but New Orleans, a grand staircase that went up and over the train station, and then over the utilities back there, and then back down. And that's where the big flume ride would be. And then I think we made provisions for there to be a continuation of development until it came all the way up to Bear Country and connected where that service gate is between the log right now and the shop.
That'd be nice.
The shop. And that was something that also that Dick Nunes had been wanting and had been on dozens of different schemes for different ideas and attractions for some time. But the roadblock was these utilities that had been built over time. At first, I think it was just a couple of chiller plants, and that was something that you could build around. But then it was a heating thing, and then it was just this big mechanical utility yard back there.
Right.
And originally, there was an underpass envisioned to go under the train track, and that was to have been part of the original New Orleans Square. But it was, kind of narrow. It's actually still there. You don't see it. It's filled with utilities now. It's filled with mechanical pipes and water pipes, but it is a utilidor. It goes under the train track from around where the French Market is, and then it pops back out. You can see it sometimes in some construction drawings, and it's our construction photos, and it's on construction drawings. And it's actually, if you had more photos you've seen those photos of Walt and Bill Martin and Bob Brown looking at the French Market model. Mm-hmm. There's actually like a theater also in front of the Haunted Mansion, a stage. And if you were to have more photos of that model, you would see this tunnel, this ramp that goes down around the French Market and then under the train tracks.
That's wild.
And they were envisioning another area at the time that would go back there, or a continuation of New Orleans Square, which they did not get the model of, but it was a provision. It was a provision. And then over time that got filled with utilities. And so that was out. And so we had instead this double, I think I worked on different plans where there'd be a big grand staircase and a birdcage elevator that would take you up for the disabled. And it's funny because people would like go, well, we can't have you go up a staircase and over. you know. It's like you have a staircase that goes up to the train station on Main Street, and this isn't even high. This doesn't even need to be that high.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, I guess you're right, And plus, we have an elevator, and which we did that in Hong Kong Disneyland. We put a little elevator so you could go up to the Main Street train station. But at any rate, that site did not work, and someone suggested we put it in the meadow next to Small World, and Tony and I didn't like that idea. And then someone suggested we put it where Discovery Bay was still being kind of thought of going, and Tony didn't like that. That didn't leave too many spots left. And so Tony kind of seemed like he gave up on it for a while. And I said, well, before we close this thing out, let me look at one more thing. Because now I had some ride track layout experience, and I always liked, I always look at Pirates of the Caribbean as another gold standard of packing, 10, pounds into a 5-pound bag.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, very sinuous, circuitous ride layout, how they were able to get it, how they were able to optimize that so much. So that was an inspiration. So I looked at that berm between Haunted Mansion and Bear Country and went about seeing if there was a way to put it on that berm, because there was a little bit of berm within the tracks, but there was a lot of that berm on the other side of the tracks that was unused and unseen. And, I kind of overlaid other things on top of that berm and went, well, you could put like 2 dark rides on that, berm back there that we take for granted. So I started doing layouts for that. And it was really tricky because you had to get over the train track. You had to get under the train track. There were all these immovable objects. There was also the Haunted Mansion show building. And the exit to the Haunted Mansion, which was, precariously close. So that's what I did. And, we came up with a 12 minutes was our goal, so that we would it's 5 more minutes than the Knott's Berry Farm log ride. It has one more drop, I should say, one more drop. And the drop is going to be 50 feet. And I think we ended up making it 54 or 55 feet, so that it would be the tallest one in the world or the country. And we put a dip drop on it. That's where Bruce Gordon and I had an argument about that. Because for some reason, Bruce always likes the fun things, but he didn't like the dip drop. And Tony sent us out to Busch Gardens in Florida because they had a dip drop on their Aero Development designed flume ride. And so we made a business trip out there just to ride on that thing. And I loved it. And I don't know why Bruce didn't like it, but he didn't like it. And then we got back and Bruce said, I don't like it. And I said, I like it. And I don't know why Tony, went. He agreed with me.
That's all he needed.
I think I just said, I thought it was neat.
Yeah.
No, you kind of go weightless for a moment and then it's a surprise.
Yeah.
And Bruce, maybe it was because it kind of went against the rules of a log flume. It's not in the water anymore. It's now a coaster on rails, on dry rails, and it makes a loud, clattery sound when you go down it and then back up. But at any rate, we kept the dip drop. So we had 3 drops, including a dip drop and the tallest drop in the world. And there was just barely enough room for that big drop. Either had to make it even taller, which would have been more money, or we had to push it more into the rivers of America, which I didn't want to disrupt, kind of the sanctity of the rivers of America. So it goes out a little bit into the rivers of America. And then I worked side by side. They brought in a hydromechanical engineer, which is what you need for a log flume ride. And Disney had never done this kind of flume ride. The Pirates and Small World are a different animal because they're flat, level, although Pirates, you go down to another level. But on one level or the other, you're flat. and you rely on underwater water jets to propel the speed of the boats, to propel the boats, and also to regulate the speed. So you can say, I want it here, I want it to be 3 feet per second, or I want the whole thing to be 2 feet per second. Whereas a water flume ride, you don't get to necessarily call the shots. That's physics and gravity and water dynamics. And so there were some things I didn't know about that. Like you can't go 5 miles an hour. I can't remember what the exact. There was some mystery spot in the miles per hour continuum that the boats wouldn't go. So you could go 1 foot per second, 2 feet per second, and then you jump to 7 feet per second, just the way water works. And so we got the guy who invented the log ride to help me with this.
Nice.
And he originally worked for Aero Development. His name was Don Newfarmer. And he was the hydro engineer on all of the water rides for Aero, including Small World and Pirates, and the flume that they did for Texas, whatever it was called back then, Astro World, and then it became Six Flags, I think. And then they did a couple more log rides. And then he left. Don Newfarmer left Aero to form his own company, or not to form his own company, but he went to be like the chief engineer at this other company called O.D. Hopkins. So he was with this company called O.D. Hopkins. He and I sat in my office for 2 weeks working this thing out. So I didn't really learn trigonometry or anything like Bob Gurr did for the Matterhorn. Don would just say, no, you can't do that, or yes, you could do that. And he'd give me the proper runouts after a drop. Everything's relative to everything else. So, if the drop is 45 degrees and 50 feet high, these are the requirements for that. So there were all sorts of little gotcha things that I had no awareness of. I thought it would be just like designing Small World or Pirates, where you can make it do anything you want as long as you're obeying the turning radius.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
It was a different animal, but I think I still have, I had a lot of iterations of those drawings, but I think I have some left of those sessions where I did, the plan views and the elevations and the sections of the entire track, putting the elevation, 132 feet, 135 and a half feet, et cetera. And locating all the center points for the radii and everything. It looked like an engineer's drawing more than a, set person's drawing.
Yeah, it's just wild to think about how different that would be. Like, I don't think of that as a long time ago, but today, if they did a project like that, it would all be in like Unreal Engine or something, the team of physicists and engineers figuring it all out, rendering it in 3D to see how it was done.
Well, now we can do the render it in 3D and the real-time simulation, but it still starts pretty much on tissue paper.
Mm.
So for the most part, the ride layouts are imagined by people in either show set design or show design. And then they work side by side with someone in the ride engineering department. Now, sometimes there either aren't the creative people available from show design, or the show producer wants the ride engineer to come up with the layout. So that happens sometimes too.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. You mentioned the Star Wars in a box where the Autopia was. What kind of ride was that? I assume that was before it was a simulator. Was it some kind of dark ride?
No, it was a roller coaster.
Oh, okay.
And it was going to use linear induction for the launch because Knott's had opened their Montezuma's Revenge at Knott's Berry Farm in the late 70s. And so Disneyland, it was funny. There was still kind of this friction between, and it wasn't between WDI and Disneyland. It was between people who thought that Disneyland shouldn't have that kind of thrill level.
Mm.
And so some of those people were at Disneyland, some of those people were at WED. But we were looking at something that would have inversions in it. And I remember just hearing, we're never going to ever do inversions. And okay, if we're never going to do inversions, what do we do to amp up the thrill? So I had it on a launch. I had it launching up this big machine that looked like it was going to catapult you. It was kind of dumb. I mean, I look at it's a neat piece of architecture that makes no sense whatsoever, especially in the Star Wars world. Plus, we were designing this to be able to switch over in case we couldn't get the deal with Lucas, so it could just become a space ride, another space ride through the planets or something. So, and I think I did a rendering. I know I did a rendering of it because I have a copy of the rendering. And the idea was that it was kind of like the cannon, I guess, on Discovery Mountain or on Space Mountain in Paris. It was a precursor to that, done in an 80s, 1980s style, where lights would strobe, as the thing. It was kind of like also a little bit like the Mighty Microscope, So it was kind of lasering you into outer space. So that went on for a while, and John Stone did some renderings, I believe, of it. And I think he showed, he was doing renderings that showed inversions on it. And so we were getting feedback one way or another on that. But that went on the, temporarily, momentarily on hold while we figured out, is this going to be with Lucas? And also now Saul Steinberg is raiding the company and all of that. So almost everything comes to a halt except for Splash Mountain, which I'm working on with Bruce and John Stone. Then, we go into the end of 1984, the autumn of 1984, and all of that fun. And then Michael and Frank join us in September or October. And I think by then we had done finished the model for Splash Mountain. We had done the different ideas for Star Wars. Maybe by then the Rediffusion simulator had come on, as an idea. Mm-hmm. And so I can't remember at what stage Star Wars was at when Michael, I think we were talking, I think it was the simulator by then. So sometime in 1984 earlier, it had switched over from being a roller coaster to a simulator, but still no deal with Lucas for sure.
It's interesting. A lot of these projects you're talking about got their start before Eisner, but are thought of as Eisner projects because, the deals got done and things happened when he came in. You came in at the tail end of the WED pre-Eisner era. What was it like being there at that time during this changeover?
Well, it was kind of quiet because they had let so many people go. And I don't know what the real numbers, but what I always hear is it went from 3,000 to 400. Mm. And so there was a little bit of that, what am I doing here? Kind of a thing. And then I realized, well, I'm making about the same amount of money as a ride operator at Disneyland. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm cheap. I'm good and I'm cheap, I guess. So, so it was, it was weird. And there were, all the kinds of rumors about all the different outcomes that could happen. It was lacking in energy. There was kind of this the morale was not so good and the future was in question. And so it was a weird time. And I was busy, if it wasn't Splash Mountain, it was Tomorrowland or some, iteration of something going on in Tomorrowland. We were always doing something. There was always some idea. And that was probably about the time I started working on the onboard audio idea for Space Mountain too.
Oh, wow.
So, but that was a private, that was kind of a passion project that I would do on my spare time. That was not a project that had a job number. So that was about it. And then Michael and Frank came on. And then I remember it wasn't long after that that I was sent to Disneyland to work on, at the WDI office there, the wet office that was run by Kim Irvine. There were all sorts of goofy proposals, going on at that time, because now Michael and Frank were on board, and just, ideas would come from every direction. And, I think they knew someone at Hard Rock Cafes. I can't even, I used to remember the name of the person who started that, and I can't even remember that now. And so they were pondering some deal with Hard Rock. And so I was sketching up ideas for where Hard Rock would go in Disneyland.
Wow.
So one of them went, I think there was a version that would go in Mission to Mars, because that was not doing any business. And then there was another version I had up by Small World that was done in kind of, in that style of the facade of Small World.
Wow.
I know. So there were all these weird requests like that. Oh, Videopolis. So I, because I guess I was, for a short time, I was the youngest person there, or at least maybe in show design, because I was 25 in 1984. So I was put on Videopolis, and I was kind of, mixed about that, because I always wanted to do something in that meadow next to Small World that was, very Disney-esque, very, you think of like the forest. Every classic Disney film has a forest in it, where there'd be a scary part of the forest and there'd be a beautiful part of the forest. And I imagined doing Sleeping Beauty or Aurora's house in the tree,
Oh, yeah.
And all these wonderful things that you could do. And now we've got to do a dance floor, a dance club there. And that was the time when I was going to dance clubs, and I was really into the 80s new wave music and all of that. And so I was working on that and coming up, with ideas, and we envisioned a lot of really great special effects. Some of them eventually made it in, and others didn't. And I did a logo for it that it became another kind of issue, I guess, because, WED doesn't do logos, not even the graphic department. The logos are done by marketing.
Oh, okay.
With the exception of, the wonderful logos that were done for EPCOT by Norm Inouye and many others in the graphics department there. So that was an exception to the logo rule. But other than that, logos were done either at the studio by marketing or at Disneyland by marketing. And here I had come up with a logo for Videopolis that some people really liked and some people didn't like. And so I kind of became an annoyance, I guess, to the people to the people in marketing and to the head of entertainment. But everyone else in entertainment told me that they preferred my logo. Like, the directors and the managers, but it was the vice president who didn't like it. And it could have been because the marketing people, and he was, that's why, because he was also marketing. He was marketing and entertainment at the time. And my logo had too many colors in it. So they came up with their own logo. So there were two logos. So the big marquee for it was my logo.
Oh, wow.
And they came up with a little bit of merchandise for it. But what you saw on the newspapers and on TV and everything was the marketing logo for it. So that was probably my entry into being a pain in the butt.
All for Videopolis.
Oh, and then Star Tours, and I did the facade for that. This was when we took out the Mary Blair murals.
Right.
Sorry.
You are the culprit. Hey, who knew?
Well, I don't think I was the champion for taking them out. I was the soldier who had to figure out, but I wasn't in complete disagreement because anything that is about 20 or 25 years old. Now, I think it's a little different now, but because things are much more eclectic now, but back then things were much more, went in and out of style quicker and more distinctively. And so by the 80s, more people were making fun of the murals or dissing the murals than they were saying we needed to keep them.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I just thought, well, Mary and all those people were smart enough to know that it would be time to to update this, especially if Star Tours is going in it. So sorry.
No, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, I totally see that decision at the time. And, if it happened today, you'd want to see them, preserved in some way at the family museum or something. But
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to make a Tomorrowland, that was always kind of an odd fit there anyway.
It kind of was. I mean, I kind of thought they were odd as a young kid when they went in. I mean, I thought they were neat, but they did kind of, as I became 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, they're kind of like, did these really belong here? Oh, I'm going to get hate mail. But I did try to figure out a deal. In fact, we estimated the cost of saving them and lifting that whole, because there's no way you can delaminate them. It's cement.
Yeah.
They're bonded forever against against a stucco surface. So you'd have to lift the whole wall out. You could probably section that off. There'd be some damage to some of the tiles, and you could repair those. And I thought, give them to a museum or to a children's hospital. Chalk is right down the street in Orange. And so they did do an estimate, and it was like 100. I don't know what it was. It was, it was expensive for a project that didn't have a lot of money for the facade, because I was asked to do this facade and here's the budget for it. And so lifting that thing out and donating it, but they could have gotten the tax, return, but that was all factored in, and it didn't factor out, to the people in charge. So that was out.
Yeah.
We were going to lift it. And so they did try to, they punched holes through it. The bottom half, unfortunately, had to go because we put doors in there. And then the upper half, they only knocked out where they needed to put in a lateral structural support. So there's like 8 or 10 holes. But most of it is still, from 8 feet on up is still there.
Yeah, that's good. Someday.
I mean, I like the idea of, donating them if possible, to a museum or something, or doing something archaeological where you could see all the different layers of, I mean, that doesn't work with Star Tours, but, maybe in some other concept of Tomorrowland, because the green steel from 1955 is still in there. And the white steel that they added as awnings a year or two after that is still there. And then the orange steel from 1967 is still there. And then I can't remember black steel from 1986 or 87. So there's all these layers of archaeology. If you cut a section through that, it would be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The neon Mickeys, I did those. That's one of the few things, I guess one of my few, everything's a team effort. And, but every now and then you get something that you can kind of take a little more ownership than other things. And so that was when I really took for granted. It's like, this is a temporary fix for this facade because we don't have very much money. And I already spent, the facade that I conceived for Star Tours was more expensive than they had budgeted for. So I basically used up the budget on the Star Tours part of that building. And there wasn't much left for it was called the Character Shop, and Disneyland wanted to change the name. So that was fine. But what could we do? That wasn't going to be very much money. And they said, just do a really nice marquee. We'll take the Character Shop marquee down and do a really nice marquee. And I thought, well, no one's going to, one marquee, another marquee, big deal. So I thought about neon, and this was about the time that a couple of the Art of Neon books came out at Rizzoli and other places. and it was starting to make a comeback, in a kind of postmodern way. But all I had to do was say neon, and I got just the most disgusted looks from people, because back then neon was like the liquor store, the massage parlor, the bowling alley. All people could think of as like vacancy, no vacancy. And, there's three colors, red, orange, and blue, and it's like, no, they're doing incredible things now with neon. And so I brought these books in and showed them, and they're like, all right, play away. And so this idea of the neon Mickeys, because I thought doing something animated would be really cool. It's kind of like celebrating the old fashioned animated neon signs, but in a new way. So I sketched out that animation very crudely. I think I can't remember who I was trying to please on this, because I don't remember interfacing with Tony on the neon Mickeys. I think I was interfacing with Randy Bright on it.
Oh, wow.
And maybe Tony was just too busy. It seemed like I had no boss. And then when I drew something up, suddenly there were three people telling me, no neon. But I drew up this Mickey thing, and then with the guy there with all the different colors, I brought Randy, or whoever I think it was Randy, over and said, look, this is not going to be the liquor store down the street. This is not going to be this cheesy Harbor Boulevard looking thing. This is going to be beautiful. It's like, okay, all right, it better be, kind of thing. But someone looked at my lousy animation drawing and said, but we have to have a professional do that. So they sent it over. They sent my sketch over to the studio and had Mark Henn do it.
Oh, okay.
And so he tightened it up. He did the cleanup. I thought he reanimated it until someone called to my attention. I posted it. I posted my drawing. I have both because no one wanted they don't like tissue paper, or they didn't at the time. So none of the art morgues accepted your tissue. And that was bad for me, because everything I did was on tissue. That was my Photoshop, right? That's how I could, iterate and evolve it from the first idea to the last idea, was layers and layers of tissue. So a lot of my stuff never made it into the art library because it's on tissue. So I took that home, and they didn't want the Mark Henn one either because it was on tissue. So I have both of them, and I posted them because I didn't think anyone cared about the Neon Mickey thing. I was shocked when I came back from Hong Kong, I think. There was a period where I didn't go to Disneyland for maybe a year or two because of all the travel and working on all these other projects. And I no longer lived in Orange County. I'm out here on the, west side of Los Angeles County. And so it may have been that I didn't go to Disneyland for a year or two. And I went after a very, very long time. And maybe I hadn't even been in Tomorrowland for like 4 years. And I just assumed it was that Neon Mickey thing was going to be gone by then. I assumed it was gone after the redo of Tomorrowland. Tony worked on. And so I was shocked that it was still there, because I liked it, but I didn't know if anyone else liked it.
Yeah. You are not alone, apparently.
Well, I didn't, another thing that pre-internet, you didn't get feedback about. And so when I posted a picture of my sketch and Mark Henn's sketch, I got all of this interest in it. And then someone pointed out that they thought that I have not examined it, but someone thought that they had either kept a lot of my poses, or that it was mostly still my poses cleaned up by Mark. But my impression was that Mark, did more than that. So I've got to take a closer look at it.
So that wraps up part 1 of our interview with Tom K. Morris. Michael, we have so much more to get to.
That's right. After this, man, Tom's got a couple of whole other theme parks to work on. He's got a book to work on, and we're going to talk about it all.
That's right. This is pretty cool to hear what's coming up next are things I'd never heard much about the making of. So that's cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting time we're going into working on Disney Studios Paris, which is a real low point, I think, for Imagineering, as Tom says, and his work on Hong Kong, which is pretty amazing, and Disney Quest, a project which never gets talked about, and so it's fun to find out a little bit about that background.
That's right. Okay, Michael, it's that time of the episode where we check in with our Patreon and see if anyone's signed up. Has anybody signed up this month?
Yeah, I'm really excited. We've got some more members of the old Order of the Chili Bowl who are going to be checking in on our monthly live stream and all that fun stuff. We've got Caleb, Keith, and our friends at Dateline Disneyland.
Wow, that sounds really official.
That is very official. Stop by and see what Andy's writing up over there on Mice Chat. It's so exciting to see him join. So, yeah, our Patreon is a great way to get our content early, to get some extra content, and to get that monthly live stream if you join, if you so desire. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Check us out at patreon.com/ProgressCityUSA.
That's right. We thank you all for contributing to that. It makes a big difference in our lives, so we thank you for that. And if you want to get in touch with us, you're not on the Patreon, you can email us at podcast@ProgressCityUSA.com. I have forgotten to mention the past few episodes, we're on Twitter. Michael's at ProgressCityUSA. I'm at Jeff G. Crawford. And we're ready to hear your suggestions or comments. It's been cool to hear from people who, have memories or stories from the parks. Getting in touch with us. So we love those as well.
Yeah, we just got a feedback. We're not doing a mailbag today, but got an email from Andrew, I believe, about the Disneyana store that we mentioned on our last Fantasyland episode, and giving us a little insight, memories of that.
That's right, which I'm envious of those memories, but thanks for writing in. So we will be back next week with Tom K. Morris and part 2 of that interview. And so until then, we hope you all stay safe. And from all of us to all of you, we thank you for listening. We'll see you here next week.